Hey, what's up, fellow slaves? I just want to quickly go over why I believe these vaccine mandates don't make any sense. Now, I want to make it very clear to the YouTube censors, because you guys removed my last video on vaccines for medical misinformation, that this video is not medical information. I am not providing any medical information, I'm not providing any medical advice or anything like that. I am just going to be looking at news articles and I'm going to be talking about why I believe this makes no sense to me. It's entirely my opinion. Are we still allowed to have opinions? Is that still allowed? Well, I guess we'll find out. So a lot of people are rolling out these vaccine mandates, and there's a lot of rhetoric going about. I want to quickly talk about rhetoric that I heard over the last month and a half. I'm not going to call it propaganda. I'll call it rhetoric, even though it's obviously blatant propaganda. But there's some rhetoric going around for, I'd say, the last month and a half that seem to have been blaming the Delta variant on the unvaccinated. They seem to have been blaming the unvaccinated for the spread of the Delta variant and such, So I wanted to know how long this Delta variant has been around for. So I just typed into Google, when did Delta variant start? And of course I found out that the Delta variant began in December of 2020. So the Delta variant isn't anything new. It originated in India, and then it spread to England, and then I guess it made its way to America. So this is interesting. Despite all of their policies, despite all of their attempts to control our movements, despite all of their mask mandates, this virus still managed to spread around the world. And it spread around the world through many vaccinated countries. Great Britain is a pretty heavily vaccinated country. I don't know too much about India. So with that out of the way, because I don't think that we can, so with that information, I think that we can go ahead and stop blaming the unvaccinated for the Delta variant, or at least the spread of the Delta variant. And I'm going to also show why we shouldn't be blaming the spread of the Delta variant on the unvaccinated, because that's the whole rhetoric that they're putting out there. And this is to set up their tyrannical move to force the vaccines, by blaming the spread of the Delta variant on the unvaccinated. They can say, look, the unvaccinated are now posing a public health risk, and now we have to force them to get vaccinated. So this is why it's important that we discuss this, and this is why it's important that we show that the spread of the Delta variant shouldn't be blamed on the unvaccinated. And this is my opinion. This is just based off of information that I've gathered from mainstream news articles. I'm not going to be presenting anything here from anything other than a mainstream news source or a CDC source. Okay. So with that out of the way, I want to talk about the White House lifting the mask mandates, because once again, we want to find who's to blame for the spread of the Delta variant, right? So in May, the White House, along with CDC guidance, decided to lift the mask mandates for vaccinated people. And of course, I can pull up plenty of news articles. There's that that Asian lady on CNN. I found a couple of videos of her where she's talking about how, yes, we need to lift this mask mandate so that people can be encouraged to get the vaccine. She was like, oh yeah, this is the carrot on the stick lady. So this was another carrot on a stick that she thought of, except that she didn't directly refer to this one being a carrot on the stick, but she indirectly referred to it as being a carrot on the stick, because she clearly said, hey, we need to lift this mask mandate for the vaccinated so that people can be encouraged to get vaccinated. People aren't going to want to get vaccinated if they don't get any special privileges along with those vaccines. So this is May. So recently, the CDC internal document leaked. Okay, now a lot of people already knew this. If you've talked to people at vaccine centers, if you've just talked to any medical professionals, a lot of people already knew this. So this internal document shows, and this shouldn't even be an internal document. There's no reason why this shouldn't be a public and open document. This should be available for everyone to see. It should be right next to the COVID-19 death figures on CNN and all these other sites. They should be also tracking this and being very transparent with it. After all, Biden did say he wanted to be the most transparent administration ever, right? I digress. So this clearly shows that between April and May, they saw a huge surge of the percentage of people who were vaccinated in hospitals. You see, this blue line represents percentage of in-hospital deaths who were fully vaccinated. That's the deaths. And this is a percentage number. That 15.1 is not a number. Like, it's not like, oh, only 15.1 died in that period. No, that's 15.1% of people who died in the hospital at that time were fully vaccinated. Then the yellow line is percent of hospitalized who were fully vaccinated. So fully vaccinated people were being hospitalized and were dying between April and May before the White House lifted their mask mandate. But they decided to lift the mask mandate anyway, right? Now, right around the same time, you have this Forbes article, COVID surges in 4 of 5 most vaccinated countries. Here's why the US should worry. And the title of this article speaks for itself. Clearly, medical professionals around the world knew that the vaccines were not as effective as they were leading the public to believe. This is very clear, at least against the Delta variant. And this is obvious. They know that viruses change every year. This is why every year we need to have new flu vaccines. And this is why every year, even though you were probably sick with the flu the previous year, you'll probably end up getting the flu this year or the following year. So there's nothing new about this. Now, finally in July, they're releasing information saying that vaccinated people can carry as much virus as others. And this is why they're saying the mask got to go back on for the vaccinated. Now, going on to a different subject now, kind of jumping on to this idea of the vaccine mandates. At my university, and in many places, all these places with the vaccine mandates, they're telling people, we don't care if you got coronavirus and you now have a natural immunity to it. We don't care about that. We want you to get the vaccine anyway. This makes no sense. When has something like this ever happened? That's like saying, I don't care if you got chickenpox before, even though it's not necessarily the same. Chickenpox is a more stable virus, but it's very similar to saying, I don't care if you got chickenpox before. I want you to get the vaccine for chickenpox now. It doesn't make any sense. It also doesn't make any sense because it's a waste of supplies. You know, if this is such a dangerous virus and it's so important to get as many people vaccinated as possible to reach herd immunity, why waste vaccines on people who already have a natural immunity? Are there not people in other countries who need those vaccines? It's very strange. Doesn't make any sense to me, as I said. I'm not saying that they shouldn't do it or that they should do it. I'm just saying, to me, it makes no sense. Now, it especially doesn't make any sense because of a couple of reasons that we're going to look at right now. So I couldn't find the original article. There was an article last year, I think it was like probably spring or summer of last year, where they did a study on a homeless population. I forget where it was, whether it was Detroit, one of these northern cities in the United States. And they found that actually a lot more people had the antibodies for the virus than were expected. And this ties into these articles here. Actual coronavirus infections far higher than confirmed cases. And here it says a model shows this, but it's not a model. You don't need a model. They did actual studies where they did antibody tests on large populations, and they found many more people had the antibodies than they thought. Now, it's hilarious, too, because if you click on this article was originally titled this, but then when you click on this NPR article, they changed the title to this, Why the Pandemic is 10 Times Worse Than You Think. And then they try to paint this idea that a lot of people were infected as a bad thing. They're like, oh, this is terrible that so many people were infected. But it's not terrible. It's actually a very good thing, because that means that many more people have acquired a natural immunity to the virus now. They were vaccinated naturally by being exposed to the virus. Now, what's even more interesting, and something that also doesn't make any sense, is that last year they were trying to push this idea that immunity to the coronavirus was temporary. They were pushing these erroneous antibody studies where they were saying, oh yeah, the antibody decline in the blood is going at such a rate where the person will not have an immunity in a really short time. And they were doing these really erroneous studies that didn't make any sense, because if you understand that it's not necessarily about the antibodies in your blood as it is about the memory in your bone marrow, like your immunity is like, it's really more tied to your bone marrow and the production. Like essentially you can have little to no antibodies in your blood, but when you get re-exposed to the virus, your bone marrow will then produce those antibodies. And they were pushing really hard last year that, oh no, this wasn't the case. And of course they were pushing that misinformation. If anything, that's medical misinformation that they were pushing. But of course, they have no retractions. None of their videos get pulled or anything like that. That medical misinformation is allowed to just linger out there. This medical misinformation that the immunity is temporary. But now, I guess as more doctors, more independent doctors do studies that they can't bury and stuff, now you have this New York Times article that came out in May 26th of 2021. And it's interesting because I never saw this article. This should have been massive headline news. This New York Times article titled, "Immunity to the Coronavirus May Persist for Years, Scientists Find." This is really important. How is this not major headline news? Oh, right, that's right, because in May of 2021, that's when they're trying to push the vaccines, right? That's when they were lifting the mask mandates, and that's when they were really pushing the vaccines and saying, oh yeah, we all got to get on board. See, so they don't want to cover this immunity. So this also goes back to it not making any sense for people who have been exposed to the virus and now who have antibodies to the virus being forced to get the vaccine. It makes no sense. Their immunity, according to this New York Times article, may persist for years. And of course, it's because this New York Times article actually goes into the real science of it and how our body's immune system works and how it goes down to our very bone marrow. They weren't talking about that last year when they were trying to convince people that our immunity to it was just temporary. So the last thing that I want to go over that makes zero sense to me, and this is something I'm surprised other people aren't talking about, is this COVID-19 surge in the summer. I understand that it's a different variant, but it makes no sense for a virus to be spreading in the summer like this. You look at any viruses before, the heat and the sunlight usually does a good job at preventing transmission of the virus. It usually does a good job at I don't want to say killing the virus, but keeping it down. For the most part, summer season is not virus season. I'm not saying that you can't get a virus in the summertime. Of course, people can get a summer flu or a summer cold. So of course you can get a virus in the summertime. I'm just saying that it's pretty uncommon. Like, you don't have explosive cases like this. So we got to ask ourselves, why is there such a surge? Why is there such a huge surge this summer? Is it entirely the Delta variant's fault? I mean, I understand last summer we can say, oh, there wasn't such a huge surge last summer because last summer was the Alpha variant or whatever they're calling it. But it makes no sense to me. I mean, I found this NPR article titled, "Summer's COVID-19 surge is on track to get worse, maybe even as bad as last winter." When was a virus? When did a virus spread as effectively in the summer as it does in the winter? See, this doesn't make any sense to me at all. But anyway, I'm going to leave the video here. I think I've talked enough. Hopefully YouTube doesn't take this down. Remember, YouTube, nothing here, I hope nothing here was construed as medical information or medical advice, because I'm not giving any medical advice. I'm not saying anything for or against the vaccine, really. Everything I said about the vaccine, I think, related to all of these headlines. So, by all means, please don't censor this video. And if you do, you guys are just making fools of yourself, because this information will get out there. People will find this information out. And, I'm going to just finish this video off by saying one more thing. This is something that I find hope in, is that these people are actually the ones who are against truth. These people are not just against truth, they're also against nature. Everything that they're doing is a resistance to the natural order of things. It's a resistance against truth, our destiny, as I talked about in a previous video with the Ortega quote. So what they are doing is not sustainable. So this information, which is all truthful information, is eventually going to come to light. It's going to be on other platforms. Other people are going to talk about it. If it's not online, if it's not on platforms, people are talking about this in person. You can't stop people from engaging one another in person. You can either be for the people, for truth, or you can be against it. And trust me, if you're against it, no matter how well funded you are, no matter how resourceful you are, you will eventually be seen for the creatures that you are.